Who do you think the greatest threat to America is right now? Is it China? A lot of people think it's China with all of their nuke weapons and all their expansion in the South China Sea, threats to Taiwan. Man, that's probably where it's at. A lot of people in Washington are saying that. Others are saying no, it's Russia because they got all those nuclear weapons. They got more than anybody else, and then you don't want to forget Iran or North Korea because they could go rogue at any time. So we got to be really vigilant on those kind of things. And there's a little bit of truth to each one of those possibilities. Certainly, we got to pay attention to them. But I argue that the biggest threat to American national security is not Xi Jinping. It's not Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, or the Ayatollah Khomeini. No, it is the DC elite in our country, the people who are influencing public opinion, some of those who are actually in office that are trying to take us in directions that are antithetical to our interest. Now, you may think that's a little over the top, but I will tell you with a lot of confidence that any of those foreign leaders I just mentioned, none of them want war. None of them. This mentality that some people are trying to explain that actually there's all these agents and elements and forces around the world that would just dying to go to war with America if only they had a chance is complete nonsense. There's no evidence to that fact. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary that they don't want a war with the United States. In fact, most of them want to defend themselves from what they see as our hegemonic activity from their perspective. They can have whatever perspective they want. But what we are doing and why I'm worried about some of our elites is because they advocate actions and policies that could actually spawn the very war that I want to deter and to prevent from coming on. Now, in case you may think that's a little over the top, I'm going to show you some specific things about why I'm concerned. But then also to help us out, we got two great folks with us today. Back to the show. You've seen them both on past episodes. We have Kelley Vlahos from the Quincy Institute and Dan McKnight from Bring Our Troops Home. And both of these are great Americans, very knowledgeable, a lot of experience both in Washington, D.C. and in combat too. So you're really going to enjoy listening to them. Thanks to you both for joining us today.
Bet, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Well, listen, let me just kind of show you all first kind of what has me riled up today. It's like, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but a couple of op-eds in the Washington Post and the New York Times both today really seem to be going in directions that continue on this idea that we have to always be sending military forces out anywhere. And we can, like this New York Times one here you're talking about, we can never leave anywhere. How many times did you see articles throughout the 2 decades of people saying why we couldn't leave Afghanistan? We can't do it. We have to keep saying there. This one was written by General McKenzie, the former commander of Central Command, and we're going to get to that in a minute, what he has to say. But the first one I want to go to is the Washington Post one, because that one is talking about, you see a big picture of Tulsi Gabbard there, and it talks a lot about warning about what some people are afraid might be in the Trump administration if he wins again. And there was also a lot of talk in there about Doug McGregor. You've seen him on our show quite a lot of the time. Now, both McGregor and Tulsi Gabbard are veterans. So that should be a first clue that why is it that the veterans, and Dan's going to talk about this shortly, why is it that the veterans are the most against stupid wars and other people seem to be really for them? We're going to get into that. But first of all, this Washington Post piece was talking about, and I want you, Gary, put that headline back up there because it's instructive. The headline there is Trump talks with Gabbard about U.S. defense reflecting isolationist approach. Anytime you see people pull out the isolationist flag, that basically means that anything besides full-on military involvement everywhere in the world is called isolationism. Of course, that's intended to harken back to 1938 and the Munich and and the capitulation to Hitler. So anybody who's anything besides full-throated, all that stuff, is going to just lay the groundwork for World War III or something like that. That is so antithetical or opposite of the reality, and it's contrary to some very solid evidence and analysis. And we're going to get to that first. But let's show you what Tulsi says that makes people so afraid. Here's what she said on the 4th day of the Ukraine war Imagine if someone had listened to it, but think of how heretical what she says is here.
Presidents Putin, Zelensky, and Biden. It's time to put geopolitics aside and embrace the spirit of aloha, respect, and love for the Ukrainian people by coming to an agreement that Ukraine will be a neutral country, no military alliance with NATO or Russia, and therefore alleviate the legitimate security concerns of both US and NATO countries as well as Russia, because there'd be no Russian or NATO troops on each other's non-Baltic borders. This would allow the Ukrainian people to live in peace. Aloha.
Now, just on the surface of it, when I heard that for the first time, and I pulled it back up earlier this afternoon, and I looked at the date on it, I just shook my head and I thought, what she said there is so rational. It makes a lot of sense. And if it had been acted on at the time, I mean, you could literally have had hundreds of thousands of people still alive today who are dead. And instead of talking about we're about to start the third year of this war, I mean, they'd be well into reconstruction right by now. And the damage that had been done would have been comparatively minimal. And who knows, what could be happening, good things in Ukraine right now. But all of that's thrown to the wind now because people want to worry about being isolationist. Kelley, I'm just wondering, I'll ask you first, why do you suppose people are so afraid or angry at people like Tulsi about possibly being in a position of authority?
Well, I think we have to look at who's launching these attacks, and mostly coming from the war party, whether that's left or right, Democrat or Republican. And the mainstream media, which is a slave to power, pretty much goes along unquestioningly with these attacks. And I've noticed increasingly over the last 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, that the word isolationist has been used more than ever. Now, we've been tagged at Quincy, other groups that have been promoting restraint have been tagged with the isolationist label since we started in 2020. But I'm talking about a more prevalent use of this, a more casual use in the mainstream media. I think that there is a concerted effort to use isolationism as an interchangeable word for restrainers, anti-war, non-interventionists on the right, for all the reasons that you mentioned, Danny, that there's connotations not only of Munich, but of Charles Lindbergh, of America Firsters, anti-Semitism, fascism, Hitler. I mean, it just wrap it up in a neat little package with an ugly black bow. Isolationism. It speaks volumes. And I don't think it's any coincidence that we've been seeing it in New York Times headlines, Washington Post stories. There was an unheard article that one of our experts had been quoted in. I think it was Anatol Levin, but I'm not sure. But it was on Ukraine, in which they called Quincy an isolationist think tank in Washington,
I think I saw that.
D.C.
I think it was
And
Anatol.
we pushed back and we asked the reporter to retract that and explained that isolationism is a pejorative and it does not describe the work we do. And they refused to take it out of the story. I do think that there are a lot of uninformed reporters out there, and they just go with the flow and they see others using it in the blob and they use it, like I said, interchangeably. And it's damning. And I think it's a concerted effort to smear people on the right who have been skeptical and have criticized the war policy. And it's coming from both left and right, but I do see it in the mainstream media more than ever.
Way too much. And we'll continue to talk about that here in just a minute. Dan, I want to shift over to you. So your organization, Bring Our Troops Home, includes quite a number of veterans. And so I wonder if you could kind of talk from the perspective of why people join your organization, which is, what by definition, what these people try to say is basically would be, quote, isolationism, but it really, what I view it is a sane foreign policy. But to what extent do the folks who join your organization want a strong national defense, so they're not anti-war, but they also don't want these kind of nonsense pointless wars like the ones that you've been trying to get us out of for all these years.
No, absolutely. And Danny, again, thanks for having me. And Kelley, it sure is good to see you. I couldn't agree more that veterans really are the ones that have the voice in this, that say typically to that these wars are pointless. And they're pointless because we go in there without a purpose, without a mission, without a definition of success. We don't know what winning looks like. We don't know when we're going to come home. We don't know what it's going to look like when we're done. In the 18 months that I was in Afghanistan, we had counterinsurgency, we had hearts and minds, we had shock and awe, we had provincial reconstruction. Those are the 4 primary missions we had in the 18 months that I was there. Neither one of them, or none of the 4, coincided with the one before it. And it just changed with whatever general came in and took over command. So veterans are typically opposed to it because we've seen the emptiness, we've seen the errors, we've seen the mistakes that are being made. And all we're asking is that if we do have to go to war, and it's so important that we're willing to spend American blood and treasure, then we should let the representatives of the people, Congress, do their job and declare war and put their name on the line before we put our boots on the ground. And this mantra that we're isolationists is just silly, because not too long ago, the statement that we seek not to impose our way of life on anyone, but rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to watch, that was Americanism. That was what we believed in. That was what our country stood for. But that comment that quote I just said, that didn't come from 40 years ago or 60 or 80 years ago. That came from 2017, and it was President Trump that said it, and the world applauded him when he did it. Today, that is heresy. Today, what Tulsi Gabbard is saying would have got her burned at the stake in Salem at 400 years ago. The foreign policy world and the Council on Foreign Policy here in the United States, they've all turned common sense upside down, and it's only for one reason. It's expansionism, and it's the mighty dollar. We have to spread our dollars through military arms and equipment throughout the world to prop up our own dollar. We have to do it. And so the government continue to print more and more and more money, and you have to, in order to control inflation, you have to spread the dollars around the world. And that's what
I got some clips we're gonna see just to expose just how true that is in here just a second. But now I want to shift gears just a little bit and show what apparently the Washington Post and the New York Times and other major media think we ought to be doing, because they sure give this a lot of coverage. First of all, let's look at one of the favorite cheerleaders here, David Petraeus.
Keep in mind that Russia, first of all, would never stop if they achieved their objectives in Ukraine. Moldova, Lithuania, a NATO member would be next.
Just to put an exclamation point on that, you're saying is they would not stop. This whole, they'd be happy if everyone would negotiate and settle for a couple provinces in the Donbass.
This is complete nonsense. He has never stopped. His goal since taking office increasingly has been to reassemble as much of the former Soviet Union or Russian Empire as he can.
So that's Petraeus in the European theater right now with the Russia war in Ukraine. And of course, I could sit here and I could go through and tell you why that is just absurd at face value. There's no way that Russia can go. They can't even finish going through Ukraine. That has no navy, no air force, no other NATO or allies that are going to fight with them. He can't even do that. And yet David Petraeus, with a straight face, wants to warn everybody that, oh my God, he's going to go into NATO and everybody will be next if he's not stopped, which is absurd on the face value of it. But that the face value has never gone beneath. No one ever talks about that. The reporters don't ask those kind of follow-on questions. That's in there. Now, I'll just give you 2 other quick examples here of in the Middle East and another theater. And the favorite target there is Iran. And we'll start with the mustachioed one, John Bolton.
I think the real problem here is that the administration simply will not face up to the reality that we're seeing a war being conducted by Iran through terrorist proxies. That's why I think that what's needed here is an attack on Iran.
Sure, why not? Just an attack on Iran. And who better to help him out than his brother in arms there and lover of all things anti-Iran, Mike Pompeo.
The Iranians are willing to fight to the last Houthi, right? They won't see this as something that impacts them directly. Every missile, every rocket that's fired on an American is an Iranian-made, Iranian intellectual property, Iranian-trained soldier. This is all Iran-backed. And the Houthis are no more fighting to avenge what happened in Gaza than a man in the moon. They are fighting because the Iranians have put them up to this. And so that's the place we're going to have to go.
These guys love to talk out of context. They don't want any context in here, as though this little thing called the Israel-Hamas war that has sparked an explosion throughout the Middle East that is causing ripple effects and indirectly caused the deaths of our 3 troops in Jordan. But we'll talk about that separately. Actually, Dan, if you want to talk about that in a minute, go ahead. But the fact that they want to characterize this as just this Iran that's out of nowhere for no good reason is spurring the Houthis to attack in the Red Sea and is spurring these other groups to attack Americans in Syria, Jordan, and Iraq is just complete nonsense. But you see, when you talk about removing troops from there and withdrawing from there, I'm going to put up something that McKinsey said, the author of that New York Times piece, in a second. But any talk about withdrawing or taking our troops out of these pointless areas here causes them to call it, not only is it not a good idea, but that's the very definition of you're trying to withdraw and showing weakness. And so, Dan, I know particularly, I'll start with you this time. I know you have a specific desire to get our troops out of there and have for a long time. What do you think when you hear these kinds of statements?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, bringing troops home should never be blacklisted. It shouldn't be something that's so out of bounds. In fact, the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, there was an amendment put in there by Liz Cheney herself and Congressman out of Colorado, I forgot his name, that strictly forbid any money being used in the defense budget for the use of withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. They amended the Defense Authorization Act so that we could never bring the troops home. And that reminds me of the time we sat in Liz Cheney's office back in 2019, and we asked her, when could we come home? What conditions must be met in Afghanistan to be able to leave? And she looked us dead in the face and said, as long as I'm in Congress, we will never leave Afghanistan. It shows you it's not about American security. It's about this empire building, and it's about paying back the people that have put them in office. And war has become nothing more than a piggy bank and a way to line the pockets of the donor class, of the political elite in Washington, D.C., and all the glass and steel buildings on K Street. And so bringing troops home is something that's never an objective for war. Winning the war is not the objective anymore. It's perpetuating endless and forever war.
And Kelley, I know you've spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. You used to work for Fox News, so you understand how a lot of this works. Why do the networks like CNN and Fox there put these guys on and don't ask any of the hard follow-up questions, a lot of which Dan just mentioned here? What's the objective? What's the national security element? Why don't they ask them those questions when they make these kind of statements?
Well, there are a multitude of reasons. One, I'll be a little generous. One, I don't think they know any better. I think that they are very nervous about talking about foreign policy and national security, and they always defer to the generals. They always defer to the military. And when the military says we got to jump and we got to fight, they bring them on and they have them unquestioningly talk about that. But I think there's something much more insidious going on here. I look at John Bolton. I look at Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo, who was just filmed joining IDF soldiers at their rejuvenation center and cheering them on for the next slaughter. He's in the bag for Israel, and so is John Bolton. But both of them, are in the thrall of a neoconservative effort to go to war with Iran that dates back far before October 7th. October 7th is just the Pearl Harbor moment that this effort, this lobby, whatever you want to call it, of anti-Iranian neoconservatives have been waiting for. And so when you hear them and you hear people like General McKenzie on Fox News saying we have to go to war, when you see Admiral Stavridis saying we have to go to war with Iran, this is part of a program. This is part of an agenda, like I said, that dates back. And who does it serve? It doesn't serve the United States. It would not serve us to go to war with Iran or start bombing Iran. It serves Israel. Israel has been trying to get us into a war with Iran for decades. And so when I hear John Bolton, I hear Mike Pompeo talk about where it's the key to the situation. We have to show them. When you see Nikki Haley going out there saying we have to punch them once and punch them hard. Yeah. Lindsey Graham, same thing. We got to bomb. This has been going on since even before 9/11. And so we have to see the source. We have to understand the context, like you said, Danny, and we have to push back on it deliberately. because this is not in America's best interest to go to war with Iran, to stir up more conflict in the Middle East. And we have to start ignoring these people. And this mainstream media has to stop bringing these people on and giving them a platform
all the time. Yeah, and so I'm gonna put up a call out from General McKenzie for what he said in that New York Times piece here in just a second. But it just cannot help but I cringe when I see that, because McKenzie was in charge for a long time of the Afghan war, and so much of the stuff that he told us was simply not true, and he was dead wrong on so many of the policies that he put in place. And to Dan's comment a minute ago, there was never an achievable military objective, and yet this is the guy that was in charge, and he wants to ignore that and have another option that doesn't seem to have anything involved. It doesn't have an outcome, a strategic outcome that can be accomplished with military power. Now, the White House is saying that actually there is a reason why we don't pull those troops out of Iraq and Syria. According to John Kirby a couple of months back, it's ISIS.
These groups and the IRGC, the Supreme Leader, they have a choice to make. We're not looking to escalate, but we absolutely have a viable mission in Iraq and Syria to go after ISIS, which is still a viable threat. And we got to make sure that we have the troops and the capabilities to do that.
Absolutely have a viable mission, he says, without explaining what that mission is or how it's accomplished with a handful of troops, like 900 in an entire country of Syria. But we won't talk about that for the moment. But Gary, pull that comment up by General McKenzie up there again. So this is from this article here. General McKenzie, who used to be the central command there. First of all, he says the attack in Jordan was against where our troops were killed was the clear, foreseeable result of our tepid response to more than 150 attacks against U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq since October. That's not correct. It is not because it was foreseeable. I agree with him there, but it's not because of our tepid responses. It's because we're there. It's because our troops are on the ground doing no mission that has anything to do with American national security. If you want to say they do periodically take out ISIS leaders, or they help out with some, snatch and grab or something like that, that's probably accurate. There are some tactical actions in that. But to suggest that that has any impact at all on the presence of ISIS in those countries means you don't understand anything about how those kind of operations are fought. It's something akin to trying to drain a swimming pool with an eyedropper on a rainy day. It's not going to make any difference at all. But yet that doesn't change anybody's mind, because, and maybe Kelley, you're right about your view, that it's not really about tactics. It's about keeping the troops there just for their own sake. But when I hear McKenzie saying, and we can put that back up there again, Gary, because the significance is that he says last month, the United States and Iraq started talks that could lead to the withdrawal of U.S. troops. Some members of the Biden administration may be considering pulling troops from Syria as well, according to this report. This kind of talk can be seriously damaging. Again, Dan, to your point there, just the talk of withdrawal could be damaging to U.S. interest in the region. It gives hope to Tehran that it is succeeding in its long-term goal of ejecting the United States from the region through its proxies. Nothing could be less helpful or more dangerous to our service members who are already in harm's way. That's the point at all, McKenzie. Why are the troops there in harm's way? I have no doubts that Iran would like to have us out. I don't doubt that that's one of their objectives. But what McKenzie didn't put there or anywhere in that article is why they should be there. What vital interest of America are they performing that without which our national security would be imperiled? That is an absolute non-negotiable first step for you to explain why American troops should sacrifice their lives, or be risked to, and now 3 have. And they don't even make that argument. They just say something about Iran would like it if we left, and somehow that's going to be worth potential for more deaths. So, Dan, again, as a veteran, somebody who's gone to these deployments themselves, and is an organization with a lot of people who also have gone to it, why does those kinds of comments, why do they kind of rub you the wrong way?
Well, first of all, how dare you speak in the affirmative of why are we there instead of why can't we leave? I mean, that is turning modern philosophy upside down. If we have a purpose to go, if there's a reason to go, me, my brothers and sisters in uniform, we'll be the first ones there. Give us a mission, give us the authority, the same Constitution that we swear an oath to. Let's just abide by that and send us the proper way. But once we're there, let's take the gloves off. We shouldn't have State Department officials escorting us on missions. If we have a mission there with a clear objective, let professionals do what professionals do, and then let us win the war and let us come home. That's the key. Is we are creating our own self-licking ice cream cone by being there. The longer we're there, the more snatch and grabs we have, the more drone strikes, the more bombings, the more raids, the more enemies we create. They call it an insurgency, but what it is, it's a homegrown farm system. Everyone that we kill, every raid that we go on, every building we destroy, no matter what the purpose is, whether it's for democracy or spreading good and pure intentions, it creates 10 more. And so the longer we're there, the bigger this hostile crowd becomes.
Such a great point. Such a great point.
Yeah, and when we were there, we were first told that when we first landed in Afghanistan, we're there to fight the Taliban. And when our boots hit the ground, we jumped out of the planes. We were like, where's the Taliban? And every Afghan we came across was like, I'm Taliban, because it didn't mean what we have made it to mean. We don't understand the culture that we're fighting. And the Afghan papers that were brought about a couple of years ago have volumes of examples of all the misunderstandings, even to the point where President Bush didn't even know who was in charge of the war effort in Afghanistan. He didn't even know who the commander of the Central Command was. I mean, American foreign policy is
dumbfounded. Yeah,
and it's when you're there and you don't have a purpose or a mission, you find yourself questioning everything. And it was when I was there that I started actually really looking into foreign policy and trying to understand why we were on these adventures, these missions around the world, why we had troops still in South Korea or in Germany. What's the point? What's the purpose? And we could never find one. And now one of the biggest bases that we have is in the Horn of Africa, in Djibouti, one of our largest foreign bases. It's because we're using it as a launch pad for wars all across the continent of Africa.
Right.
That the American media aren't even talking about. It's one of the most hostile regions of the world. And we're engaged in hot conflicts in 17 countries in the African continent. It's just absurd.
It is. And Dan, you bring up a great point there that I want to highlight, is that all of this nonsense about, people, on our side of this argument here, wanting to be afraid to go abroad and all of that kind of nonsense that they talk about. There's no truth to that at all. If there's a war to fight, we'll fight the damn thing and we'll win it. And we have no problem defending America. Absolutely none whatsoever. I bet the majority, if not all of the folks in your organization feel the same way. It's the dumb wars that shouldn't be fought, that have no value and certainly no strategic objective, that we very much have a problem with. That's foolish policy. That's what we're against. So it's not what they're claiming. Kelley, in the last section, I want to move to real quick here in the time we have left. You touched on this a second ago, and now I'm going to give you some red meat here. You get a chance to go into what's really behind a lot of this. First, we have former General Kellogg on Fox News talking about what we should do in Iran.
They have to do what I would call super escalate. They have to take it to a level that everybody's uncomfortable, including those in the Situation Room, where you go to a level you say, okay, this isn't a gamble. It's a risk, and we understand the risks involved. But until we make a clear message, we send a clear message, these are going to continue. So you have to go outside of your normal box, and you have to break the escalation ladder. Either attack the Quds Force leaders, that's Ismail Ghani, or the Supreme Leader Khomeini, or the facilities they've got in Iran, but somebody has to make a hard call, because now we've reached a point where we're going to have to do something very hard, very strong, and the response is going to be probably, from their end, it could be proportionate. So be prepared for that.
And then in terms of what we're really trying to accomplish, Secretary of State Blinken throws a little bit more fuel on that fire.
Last week, NATO signed a $1.2 billion contract to produce 220,000 artillery shells. That's going to help allies restock their own arsenals, and it complements efforts by the United States, by the European Union, by Ukraine, to ramp up defense production. This will make NATO itself and all allies much more resilient for future threats as we move forward.
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. This is a win-win for us.
It's a win-win, Kelley. It's all about the production. We get to make more stuff. They're already talking about all these contracts and whatever going in to make a lot more ammunition and artillery rounds. It'll take multiple years, even though the war in Afghanistan or in Ukraine is probably on its last legs. But they're talking about stuff that's going to be ramping up for years to come. So there's a lot of happy defense contractors out there.
Yeah, it's absolutely. Super escalation is a win-win for the 80% of generals and admirals that have retired over the last 5 years and went to work for defense contractors. And we're not just talking about the big primes like Lockheed Martin, but mid-sized, smaller contractors who are all getting involved in AI and all sorts of weapon systems and new technologies. So when you hear people like, say, General Jack Keane, for example, or Admiral Stavridis on MSNBC, talking about super escalation, talking about going to war, talking about ramping up, talking about being more competitive with China and have to amp up, our technology to meet the moment. Take a look at where some of these guys are working and who they're working for and what boards that they're working on and sitting on right now. It would boggle the mind how swiftly and quickly that rotating revolving door is spinning. And it's not just the defense contractors. We're talking about 77 senior officials from the Pentagon going from retirement into working for foreign governments, many of them repressive regimes like Saudi Arabia and UAE over the last 20 years, 77. It may not seem like a lot to you, but when you take a look at some of the big names like H.R. McMaster or General James Mattis, who have gone from being at the top, the very top of the Pentagon, who have access to all of our classified information, our plans, our strategies, and then leaving office and going and advising the United Arab Emirates, which is involved in all sorts of creepy militaristic conflicts in Africa, had been bombing Yemen for 9 years. And you have to think, okay, so when I hear these guys on the media, whether it be MSNBC or Fox News, talking about how we have to bomb hard, we have to ramp up, we have to, basically
escalate.
give the defensive industry whatever they need, to build more weapons, artillery shells, whatnot. Take a look at the source, see where they're coming, see who benefits. It's all, like Dan said, it's all about the almighty dollar. Obviously, there's ideological agendas going on as well, but the defense industry has absolutely benefited from these wars and will continue to do so.
As long as we allow it to happen. Dan, let me end with you on your section here. Your organization is trying to do something about it. You've not just complained about this stuff. You've actually put some boots on the ground, so to speak, to actually do something. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing through the rest of 2024 to try to limit the ability to send troops out there, at least at the National Guard level?
Absolutely. So real quick, though, the super escalation comment, I need to address this real quick. We have a defense contractor here in my hometown that builds a very tiny little mechanism that goes into a missile guidance system. And their super escalation in corporate profits were when they got to recruit and hire their first 4-star general. They celebrated. They had a company picnic and they celebrated it. So the super escalation is in the profit margin. Our organization, we are fighting this. We're sick of seeing the South Carolina National Guard guarding the oil wells in Syria with Bradley fighting vehicles. We were tired of seeing the Florida National Guard in Ukraine when a hot war kicked off because they were there engaging in defense and common defense with the Ukrainian military. Our fight is no longer in Washington, D.C. We can't fight there. We can't win. We're not big enough. So we've gone back to the state legislatures where we're opposing foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy at the state level by passing legislation and pushing legislation that would require the governor to withhold the National Guard from the state if Congress hasn't declared war before they can go overseas. So if they want the Idaho National Guard to go to Iraq to fight in a war, Congress has to declare war first before the state can release that National Guard. And we've got the bill in 30 plus states, 40 states we have sponsors in, 30 states are actively working on it. We just passed out of the committee in the Georgia Senate yesterday. We passed the New Hampshire House a couple weeks ago. We're about to pass in Maryland, believe it or not. In Maryland, We're about to pass through a House committee. We passed the Arizona Senate. We're working on an AUMF nullification bill in Idaho right now. We're telling the states to stand up and flex. The states have the power and the authority. The states and the people, we trump the federal government. The federal government only has limited and very clearly defined powers that we give to them. And so we're fighting where we live. We're lifting where we stand, and that's in the States. And we're having a major conference on this in Arizona on March 9th. Colonel Douglas McGregor, one of your friends and one of my heroes, is going to be there speaking with us. Kerry Lake is going to be there talking about border security and how the National Guard should be at home protecting us from the invasion at the southern border. And we've got all kinds of state legislators from Arizona that are champions on our bill that are going to be there to address the crowd. And that's at defendtheguard.us/border if you want tickets to that event. But we believe that we have to fight the fight where we live and where we stand, because we can't fight it on K Street. We can't fight it on Pennsylvania Avenue. And it's that you want to talk about a dumb war. That's the dumb war, is trying to fight it there.
Wow. Well, that's great. I'm really happy to hear that. We'll be eager to hear what happens in March on that. And I hope we'll have you back on afterwards so you can give us a good report, hopefully. And final word to you, Kelley, because I know you work for an organization at Quincy Institute that is formed almost entirely to try to battle a lot of this nonsense. What are some of the things you guys are doing?
Well, I just want to say congratulations to Dan, because you guys have been doing yeoman's work, and I know it hasn't been easy. What a challenge! But I'm just so proud to know you, and we've had a few of your articles on responsible statecraft, and we'll continue to do so because I feel like it's such an important cause. We're firing on all cylinders, Dan. I mean, we're working on issues with Israel and Gaza and getting the troops home from Iraq and Syria, and pushing back on all of the primacist arguments for keeping us in the Middle East today. Some of the stuff that I talked about regarding Israel and its intentions, or this effort to get us into war with Iran and the Ukraine. We've been, fighting endlessly to get a diplomatic pathway out of that war. And as you know, it hasn't been easy. We've taken a lot of slings and arrows, but we've been right all along, just like we were right about getting out of Afghanistan. So we're taking a lot of unpopular positions, but they're all rooted in realism and restraint and common sense, and siding with the American people and giving the American people a chance to look at these issues and understand them, not through the filter of the mainstream media, which we believe is in the service of the defense industry and the war party in Washington.
Yeah, well, whether it's intentionally that way or not, that's the net result of it. And listen, well, the thing that ties you two both together is you're both of you care about the people, you care about America, you love America, and you also don't want things that are stupid that work against our interests. And you actually try to do something with the power that you have where you are to do something about it. And I'm very grateful to both of you. Thank you for coming on the show itself, but especially I'm grateful for what you do for our country, the way you serve. There's a lot more ways to serve than just in uniform, and you're both great American patriots, and I appreciate you both.
Thanks, Danny.
And that's all we have for you today. We're going to continue to stay on this top of this situation here. We remain unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the hard truth, whatever it happens to be, because we want to hold people's feet to the fire. We want you to know what's really going on. And when you hear some comments like this, we want you to have the knowledge behind what's really going on underneath and what is or is not in American national interest. And we're going to continue to bring you all kinds of information like this that you have. So we ask you to like and subscribe, share this with your friends so that more people have access to information that you just flat aren't getting on mainstream media. And we want you to be on tomorrow. We got some great shows for you tomorrow. We have Mike Domino, former CIA officer. A lot of you guys know he's got some great insights. You're not going to want to miss that. And we're going to continue doing shows just like this. Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.